What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into our must-start players for Week 8 of the 2022 Fantasy Football season. If you guys do enjoy today's content, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button if you are new to the channel. It really does help us out if you guys hit that like and consider subscribing. And please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Just to be clear on this segment, on a weekly basis, we're not going over players like Tyreek Hill, who's a no-brainer start against the Detroit Lions this weekend, or Derrick Henry, who has the worst rated run defense this weekend. These are players who are maybe on your bench at times, or maybe you have players who've been semi-comparable or comparable so far on the season. You're having to make those tough decisions. So these are really players who might be a flex or on the bench who we're definitely trying to get into our starting lineups based on matchups and overall performance so far on the season. Without further ado, let's hop into today's content. All right, first up on the list, I've got AJ Brown and Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. I love both of these receivers this weekend. These Steelers are second to last in the entire NFL against the wide receiver position from a fantasy perspective. AJ Brown has come in as your wide receiver 18 so far on the season, while Devonta Smith is your wide receiver 27. So neither of them are top 15 or even top 10 wide receivers so far, but they've definitely both been very productive and consistent. AJ Brown has one game this year under 11.9 fantasy points. Devonta Smith had the goose egg in week 1, which was a huge bummer, but outside of that, week 4 he had 4.7 fantasy points. Every other week he has had 15 or more fantasy points. Guys, I can't emphasize enough how much either AJ Brown or Devonta Smith should be in your starting lineups. I think Devonta Smith is a phenomenal flex heading into the week. I think he brings a ton of upside. I think AJ Brown is a very safe floor and a very good ceiling player up against this absolutely abysmal Pittsburgh Steelers secondary here in week 8. And next up, we've got Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals quietly coming in as your running back 11 in full PPR so far on the season. He gets the Cleveland Browns on Monday Night Football, who are ranked 28th overall against the running back position in fantasy football. Mixon has been very consistent on the year. Only one game so far on the season under 11.3 fantasy points, and in his last two matchups, he's had 16.8 or more fantasy points and a touchdown in each of his last two games. This is one of the best matchups Mixon will have all season long. Plus, with the news of Jamar Chase going to miss a couple of weeks and T. Higgins now having to come in and play at wide receiver 1 and Boyd having to step up as wide receiver 2, although Hayden Hurst, the tight end position, has also been very productive. I mean, this offense is great. They have a lot of depth, but I am of the belief that looking at the matchup, the offensive game plan will definitely be to utilize a lot of Joe Mixon, especially if the Bengals can get up in front early with their passing attack. So I think Mixon is a smash play as we move into week 8. All right, this one might surprise you. Next up, we've got DJ Moore, who I was not a fan of in week 7. I really thought the smartest thing to do was to sit back and see what happened with DJ Moore without Christian McCaffrey on the team and without Baker Mayfield as the starting quarterback. And he had his best fantasy performance of the season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 7, 19.6 fantasy points, 10 targets, 7 receptions, 69 receiving yards, and a touchdown, his second touchdown on the season. The Atlanta Falcons are the worst team in the entire league against the wide receiver position from a fantasy football perspective, and they are one of the worst teams in the league from a fantasy perspective against the quarterback position. I really think that PJ Walker and DJ Moore are going to have a nice afternoon and a nice little, gritty divisional game. I think DJ Moore is just about all the Panthers have in terms of the offensive side of the ball, so I don't see any reason why he can't garner another 10 to 12 targets and put up a very good stat line against the Atlanta Falcons as we move into week 8. DJ Moore is an absolute smash flex play. All right, Raheem Mostert will face the Detroit Lions here in week 8. They are ranked 30th in the league against the running back position. And let's face it, the Detroit Lions defense has just been awful. Tyreek Hill is going to have a great weekend. Jalen Waddle is going to have a great weekend. Mike Gesicki and Tua Time are probably all going to have a great weekend. But I've gotten a lot of questions so far through the week about Raheem Mostert. Should he be in my starting lineup? Should he be a flex? Should he be my RB2? And the answer is absolutely yes. Coming off of his best fantasy performance in week 7 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he had 20.9 fantasy points, 16 touches, 79 yards on the ground, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 30 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. There's no reason to move full steam ahead against the Lions this weekend with Raheem Mostert. I really think this game script will benefit Mostert. Don't get me wrong, it's going to benefit most of these Dolphins players, like I said, but Mostert is undoubtedly a player who needs to be in your lineups as we approach week 8. All right, moving on to our must-start tight end of the week. I've got Zach Ertz, and this one might be a little bit unfair because Ertz comes in as your tight end 3 overall in fantasy football. So for about 99% of you guys, he's probably going to be a smash play. But believe it or not, I've gotten a lot of questions from a lot of rosters who own Zach Ertz and own another tight end. And Ertz is coming off of his worst fantasy performance so far on the year, week 7 against the Saints on Thursday Night Football. 6.1 fantasy points, 4 targets, 2 receptions. This was also the first game where DeAndre Hopkins was present for the Arizona Cardinals. So I've also gotten some fear about the addition of Hopkins coming back from suspension and how that's going to continue to affect Zach Ertz. But I think Ertz is going to be just fine. The Vikings rank in the bottom 20 against the tight end position from a fantasy football perspective. I think this is a really good matchup overall for Zach Ertz. I think he's an absolute lock in your lineups as we approach week 8. On a side note, if I had to choose a must-start streaming option for the tight end position, it's going to be the tight end who is facing the Arizona Cardinals this week, and that is Irv Smith Jr. of the Minnesota Vikings. The Cardinals are the worst team in the league against opposing tight ends from a fantasy perspective. So if you are in need of a great streaming option, go see if Irv Smith is available. The Vikings were on bye week in week 7. He is another smash play as we move into week 8. All right, our must-start quarterback of the week is going to be Danny Dimes himself, coming in as quarterback 11 in fantasy football at the moment. He gets the Seattle Seahawks, who aren't necessarily awful against the quarterback position, but they still come in as the 22nd worst team in the league against opposing quarterbacks. And I just like the game script that I think we're going to see between Seattle and New York on Sunday. I think this game could get a little bit out of hand. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some good play by both of these defenses, but they both do tend to kind of bend towards the end of games. So I think that Danny Dimes could put together a really nice stat line coming off of his best fantasy performance in week 7 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. 28.7 fantasy points, 202 passing yards, a touchdown, 107 rushing yards for Danny Dimes in week 7, and a rushing touchdown. I think that Daniel Jones is really no longer a streaming quarterback in fantasy football with the way the Giants have started to play football overall this season. And on top of that, this matchup, this game script, I just have a good feeling about Danny Dimes being a really solid play for those of you who own Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes and needed a really good flex option, or for those of you who maybe have had quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, although Brady had a good game overall on Thursday Night Football from a fantasy perspective. If your starting quarterback has been struggling, or maybe you just have a quarterback whose ceiling doesn't feel great like a Derek Carr, Daniel Jones is going to have a great game, mark my words, as we head into week 8. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you are new to the channel, really does help us out if you guys hit that like and consider subscribing. And please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.